Hello and welcome to How to Use Jen Rozenbaum's Photoshop Actions. I'm Gregory James Thiele, an Adobe Certified Expert, and I'm going to be taking you guys through how to get the most out of this really great action set. Now if you notice, along the top and the bottom of the screen, you'll find buttons so that you could skip directly to the action that you really want to learn more about. Now the reason behind doing this, setting up the video this way, is because I know that everyone out there has different levels of experience with Photoshop. So if you hardly ever use Photoshop or you have very little experience using it, I strongly suggest that you watch this video all the way through and that you don't skip ahead. Now, once I'm done rambling through this intro, I'm going to go over some Photoshop basics with you guys. And this is just so that you know how to actually use these actions, because there are just certain things that you need to know how to use. We're going to go over how to use the brush tool, layer basics, and also some basic masking techniques. We're obviously going to show you guys how to install and run these actions in case you've never used an action before. And, even if you have zero experience working with Photoshop, you'll at least be able to know how to use these actions by the end of the video. And then after that, what we're going to do is we're going to actually go into each action individually and show you how to use it to the best of your abilities. And at the very end of the video, I'm going to show you guys some pro tips that I use every day while using Photoshop to help speed up my workflow. Now, for those of you who feel like you know all these Photoshop basics, feel free to just skip ahead to any action you want to learn about. But for everyone else, let's jump right into the basics. Let's start off with how to install this action set. So after you've downloaded Jen's action file, you'll see that it's actually a .atn file. Now, the fastest way to actually install this in Photoshop is to just make sure that Photoshop is opened. You don't need to actually have a file open. It's okay if you don't. If you do, it's fine. Either way, it doesn't really matter. Just minimize Photoshop, go to your actions file, and simply double click on it. Now, sometimes this will open up Photoshop for you, sometimes it won't, but either way, it really still just looks like it didn't do anything at all. However, if you go to your top menu bar and you click on Window and click on Actions, you'll see what it actually did was add the entire action set to the bottom of your Actions panel. So here are all the actions that I had before, and we see Jen's actions at the very bottom of the list. So we're going to start off by going over the brush tool. Now, I know a lot of photographers shy away from this tool because they think that it's just for drawing and painting. But once you learn how to really work with this tool, you'll be able to do some amazing things with it, like fixing skin tones, removing blemishes, adding splashes of color, and just so much more, just with this one tool alone. Now let's get started by selecting our brush tool from the toolbar. Now, the three things that you really need to learn when working with the brush tool are how to change the brush's size, the brush's hardness, and your brush's opacity. So changing the brush size and the brush hardness is actually very easy to do. And let me just start off by making a few little brushes, little brush marks here. So we can see that we have a nice, really hard, really solid, round shape. Now, what I want to do is increase the size. So, easy way to do that is to just right-click on your artboard, and it'll pull up this little brush menu. So, from here, I could just adjust the size of my brush. And I can just keep doing that, and paint bigger sized brush strokes, or brush marks. Now, that's to change the brush size. We also have the brush hardness over here. So when the brush hardness is set at 100%, you see you get a nice hard edge around your brush. If we start lowering that, you see that the edge around your brush mark gets a lot softer. So let me just keep showing you guys it lower and lower. And once you get to 0%, you get a very faded, very feathered brush mark. And you could actually do a whole brush stroke by just clicking and dragging, and the entire edge is very soft, very faded. And the reason why you want to do this is, let's say you're painting on like a skin tone onto your image, and you want it faded in. You don't want it hard because it'll just look like you just painted a smush all over your image. So lowering the hardness of your brush will help fade that in and blend into your original image. Now, on top of blending into images, the last thing that you want to end up changing is your brush's opacity. And sadly, it's not in this little menu when you right-click on your artboard. And once again, all you have to do is just right click anywhere on your artboard and it pulls up this little brush menu. If you right click outside of your artboard, it pulls up a completely different menu. So just make sure that you're inside your working area and you could right click and get this menu. But like I was just saying, in this menu, you do not see an option to adjust the opacity. And where do you get that? Well, you actually get that in this top little menu bar here when your brush is selected. So you can see your opacity up here. It's set at 100%. So let me just show you the examples of that. So here we go. Let's just drag it down and you can see how the brush looks at different opacities. And you can't go down to 0 because then you wouldn't be painting anything. So the lowest is 1% and that's very, very low. So the way that this works is, as you can see, it's just adjusting the opacity. It's not adjusting the softness or anything like that. It's not changing the color to a different gray. It's actually just lowering the amount of this brush. So if I keep brushing on top of the same mark, it gets darker and darker and darker. And that's because I'm just layering this brush stroke or this brush mark on top of itself. So you get different opacities, and wherever they overlap, it gets darker and darker and darker and darker. And that's how opacity works. So now let's take a look at how layers work inside of Photoshop. And it's very basic what I want to show you, but once you get the hang of it, you could do some really cool stuff with layers, and I'll even show you in a few seconds. So what I want to do in my layers panel over here on the right, I want to actually create a brand new layer. And at the bottom of here, you have this little icon that says create new layer. So I'm just going to create a new layer. I'm going to go back to my brush tool. Let me see, hardness 100. Let me increase the size a little bit. Let me increase the size a lot. So I'm just going to make a little brush mark. Let me undo that. I'm going to undo by holding down Command and pressing the letter Z. I want to actually get my opacity up to 100% also for this example. So just making a brush mark on here. So now I have this one layer with this one brush mark. Let me make a second layer. And for this second layer, I'm actually going to change the color of my brush. So I'm just going to go into my swatches and select whatever color. So now I have these two colors and they're on two separate layers. And what you could do is just go to your move tool. And with the layer selected, you could move it around independently. If we had both of these marks on the same layer, if we tried to move it, it will move both of them at the same time. So having different effects, different marks on different layers will help make your life a lot easier in the long run because you could actually do some pretty cool things. So some of the things that we could do is we could actually adjust the opacity of these layers and overlap them. So let me show you how overlapping works. So right now I have the red dot on a layer that's above the black dot. But if I change that, if I move the black dot layer above the red dot, all I'm doing is clicking and dragging and moving it above layer 2. Now you can see that the black dot is layered above the red dot. And going back to what I was saying before, we can actually adjust the opacity of these layers. So in your layer panel, you see that you have an option for opacity. So let me lower the opacity of the red dot, and you can see that it's blending in with the black dot. And we could lower the opacity of the black dot, and you see how that works. So you get some cool looking effects. And this is a very simple, very stupid example. So let me actually show you how you would use something like this on an actual photo. So over here I have an image of a model, and what I actually did was I applied one of Jen's actions to it. I applied Retro 3 to it. And you can see that I have this layer on top, which is the Retro 3 effect. And I think it's actually a bit too harsh for this image. It's a little bit too much. So what we could do to even it out and lower its effect is to actually just lower its opacity. So I have the Retro 3 layer selected, and I can just go to its opacity and start dragging this slider down. And you can see that it's lowering the effect of it, and I like it somewhere around like the 75%, 70, 75, around there. And you know, it's just fine little touches like that is what you're really looking for and really going for when you're adjusting opacities and stuff like that. So you're really looking to just really like fine tune things when you're playing around with like opacity sliders, because sometimes an effect is too much, sometimes it's not enough, and you could play around with that by just moving the slider around. Maybe I want a really subtle retro look, so I could just maybe leave it somewhere around like the 40%. So here's my original image, and here it is with the subtle retro effect. So something like that is good, and this is how you do it. Now let's take a look at layer masking. And most of the actions that Jen has in here for you guys will actually include a layer mask on the effect. And what you could do with a layer mask is you could actually show or hide where you want the effect to be on your image. So as you can see over here, you have like this little white box. This is essentially just saying that there is a layer mask on this layer. And because it's completely white, that means that the entire effect is affecting the entire image. But if we take this layer and we grab our brush tool, now if we start painting black on with this layer, with the layer mask selected, if we start painting black on it, it's actually hiding the effect from us. Cool. So this is where everything's going to come into play right now, because now we see that we could actually just paint black on here and it's hiding the effect. If we switched back to white, it will actually paint the effect back in. And this is all just painting on this one layer mask layer. If we actually paint it on top of, an actual layer, then it's not showing or hiding. So you want to make sure that you're doing this on the layer mask. Now, let's switch back to black. And what we could do is we could adjust the hardness of our brush. So let me just drop it down all the way to 0%. And now we get a much more softer feathered effect. So you hardly even notice it. Well, no, you notice it a lot that her hair and her face are not applied with the same effect. But you could see that it's much more faded in and it's much more subtle than if I just did her arm. You see the hard edges around here. But if I drop that back down, you could see that it's very faded and much more subtle. And once again, that's just painting black onto this mask layer. I could switch it back up to white and paint the effect right back in. And there you go. And once again, play around with that, play around with the opacity of the layer, and you have a whole lot of creative control when working with these actions. So that's pretty much all the basics that I wanted to go over with you guys. Just to recap, it's just learning how to use your brush tool, learning how layers work and play around with them, and how to use masking. And the main thing to just remember when you're working with masks is you want to paint on the actual layer mask, and you want to remember that white shows and black hides. So if I paint black on it, it's going to hide whatever that layer is masking. So whatever layer I have the layer mask on, right now the layer mask is on this entire Retro 3 effect. So as I paint black, it's hiding that effect. If I go back to white, it's showing the effect. So that's pretty much it. It's very simple once you know it and you see how it works. So let's just jump right in and start showing you guys how to actually work with these actions and move on to how to do a full retouch. Now, full retouch includes everything that you will need to edit your photos all in one action. Now, looking through Jen's action folder, you'll see that there are actually two full retouches. You have one that's 16-bit, and you have another one that doesn't even say how many bits it's for. But the one without the 16-bit is actually for about 8-bit photos, which is really what most people work on. You only do 16-bit if you're working for like high-end magazine or something like that, or something crazy print. You would actually change your channel bit depth to about 16-bit. And if you ever do that, if you ever work in this mode, then you actually have the actions here. So just apply that. It is a little bit different than the 8-bit version, but once again, for about 98% of the people who are going to be using these actions and editing photos, this is going to get you everything that you need. So let me just run the action, and what you do to actually run the action is you select it, and then you hit the little play icon here at the bottom of the actions panel. And that's just gonna go through everything. There's a whole bunch of steps that actually are part of this one action, and if you want to see all those steps, you could just click the little triangle next to any of the actions, and you can see everything that it's doing. And you can see it's quite a lot. There's a lot of steps in here before it even finishes. So I ran the action, and now once you run the action, it doesn't do anything to your image right away, but what it does is it sets everything up for you to actually edit. So on our layers panel, you'll see that we have a couple layers added. We have a dodge layer. We'll end up using this to lighten our image in certain spots. We have a burn layer, which will allow us to darken our image in certain spots. We have blemish removal. I'll let you guys guess what that does. Lighten under eye. This is good because if you have, dark circles around the eyes underneath, we could lighten that up using this layer. And then we have skin airbrushing. So this is the layer that you'll use to soften out the skin, and it will help get rid of some these veins and these lines and everything like that. So skin airbrushing is a really cool, fun layer to work with. So let's just start from the top, and we're going to start with our dodge layer. Now, as you might have learned from the layer basics, you could see that there's a mask on this layer. And normally a mask will be completely white if it's showing everything, but you could see that these layers, the masks are all completely black. That means everything is hidden, and the reason because of this, the reason to have everything hidden is because let's just see what it looks like if I had it all white instead of all black. You can see the entire image is lightened, and we don't want that. We just want certain spots lightened. So now I'm going to use my dodge layer to actually lighten up certain parts of this image. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring out some of these highlights on her face, even lighten up certain parts of her hair. Now the way we're going to do this is we're going to grab our brush tool, and we already have it set to white. If you didn't have your color set to white, just set it to white, and we're going to paint white directly on this layer mask. So what I want to do actually, I'm going to bring my opacity up to 100%, but I want to bring the hardness down to 0. So my hardness is down to 0, and I'm just going to paint in here. It's going to look horrible because I'm at 100% opacity, but we're going to fix that. So I want to bring up this highlight over here, and that's about it for right now. Really want to get it in the hair. Now it looks horrible on the cheek over here. And it's a little bit too much on the hair, and it really is just a bit too much at 100%. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go over to the layer. I have the layer selected, and I'm going to drop its opacity. So I'm just going to blend that in a bit, and around 64%, around there, it's looking great. I like that. And to see how the effect looks, turned on and off, just click the little eyeball on the side of your layer. And that'll turn it off, that'll turn it on. So doing that, I could see that it's actually still a little bit too much, especially on the cheek over here. I really don't like that. I kind of like it on the hair and over here, that's fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back, I'm going to select my layer mask, and this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint black, because once again, white will show and black will hide. So I'm going to drop my opacity down, and I'll even go with a big brush. I'll go with a big brush because I know I just want to attack this cheek here. So I'm at 56%. It really doesn't matter what I'm at. I just want it less than 100. I'm just going to click on there, and that dropped it down to something that I like. I like that. And once again, just keep checking yourself. Just turn it on, turn it off, turn it on, turn it off. Off, on. And I like the way that that looks. So that's it. And that's how simple it is to work with the dodge layer. And it's pretty much the same thing for the burn layer. Just keep in mind that the burn layer is going to darken instead of lighten. So let's do that. I want to darken up these parts of the hair and maybe even her eyebrows, and just add some more depth to her face. So let me bring that back up to 100%. I want to work that way first. And let me lower my brush size. And let me just darken up these dark spots in her hair, maybe her eyebrows, eyelashes a little bit, and maybe even part of her face. Now, over here, it looks like I'm doing nothing, and that's because I am doing nothing. And the reason why is because I forgot to change my brush from black to white. So let me set it to white, and let me start painting on the burn layer. There we go. That's really dark. That is really, really dark. But you can see how it's burning and making certain parts darker. Let me do that, and it's way too dark. You can see that it's way too dark, but that's fine. You want it to be that way because you could adjust it. So we're going to go back to our burn layer, and we're going to just drop the opacity down. And there we go. Look at that. Beautiful. Much more subtle. Turn it off, turn it on. And you can see that we added much more depth in her face, and it just looks more dynamic. It looks more sharp. It looks more brought out because we're playing with the dodge and the burn. We're brightening certain spots. We're darkening certain spots. And this is how it looks with it off, and this is how it looks with it on. Much more dramatic, much more contrasty, and that's what you use dodge and burn for. Now, the blemish removal layer is great for keeping all your little touch-ups on its own layer. Now, the most common and quickest way to remove blemishes is actually with the spot healing brush. And you can find that in your tools bar, and it's actually right above your brush. And you can see spot healing brush. Now, let me just zoom into the image. Now, the spot healing brush works just as your brush tool does, and you can even right-click inside your artboard to adjust the size and the hardness of it. Now, I have the layer selected, and if I try using it on these blemishes, nothing's going to happen. Not with the normal settings of this tool. What you want to do in order to make sure that it works properly is you want to go up to the options bar for the tool, and you want to make sure that sample all layers is checked. Now, with that checked, all I have to do is just hover over a blemish and just click, and it goes away like magic. And you can keep doing this to all the spots on her. And it's a really quick, easy way to remove blemishes. Now, the one thing you really want to do is you want to make sure that your brush is kind of like as small as possible, and you're zoomed in as close as you can in order to really keep the skin detail and still get rid of these blemishes. Now, one of the great reasons why you do all of this on its own layer as opposed to just directly on top of the image is because we could keep it if we want or hide it if we want. So we could even just lower the opacity of it. So I have all the blemishes removed in this little area, but if I lower the opacity, it will start to bring them back in. This is great if you want to not necessarily get rid of certain marks, but you just want to dumb it down a bit. All you have to do is just have a low opacity setting. And it still looks good, her skin still looks smooth, but you still have these marks on there. And if you set it all the way up to 100%, they're completely removed. All right. Next, let's move on to lighten under eye. Now, this is its own layer. It doesn't have a layer mask or anything like that, but the way you work on this layer is you want to grab your eyedropper tool, and you want to select a light color underneath the eye. We want to get rid of like this darkness over here and the darkness over here. So I have my eyedropper tool selected. It's right over here in your toolbar. And I'm selecting a light color in this area. Now I'm going to go back to my brush, and I'm just going to paint in underneath the eye. And you can see that that just lightened it up a bit. Now let me do the other eye. I want to sample a different color from over there because it's going to be a little bit different. I'm going to go back to my brush tool. Let me lower its size, and let me just paint in here. And there we go. Now let me zoom out, and you could really see the effect. And let's turn it off and on so you can see how it's looking. So if I turn it off, that's how it looks. If I turn it on, and now you see. Now, one thing that I don't like about it is that when it's on, I actually got rid of some of the shadow over here, and you kind of want to keep that. You want to dumb it down a bit, but you don't want to get rid of it completely because then she looks a little bit alien and it looks a little bit fake. So, once again, let's just drop down the opacity of this layer. The layer is already set to a low opacity, but I want to go even lower. So if I set it down to 0, that's not going to do it because that will show no effect. So let's bring it somewhere around 10%. And that looks good to me. And if we turn it off and on, you can see it's just a subtle effect, but it does lighten underneath the eyes. And it still keeps the shape of the eye, and it still keeps it looking great. Now, last but not least, we have our skin airbrushing layer. Now, as you can see, this has a mask on it, and it is completely black, which means that the entire skin airbrushing is hidden. So what do we want to do? We want to grab our brush tool, and we want to paint white on all the areas that we want the skin to be airbrushed. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to adjust my brush, and whoops, okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to adjust my brush size a bit. Let me make it a little bit bigger. And I'm just going to run through this really quick, and I'm just going to paint on her skin. I'm just painting white. That's all I'm doing. So I'm just painting her skin. And as I'm doing this, it really, really, really looks like I'm not doing anything at all. You know, someone else came to me with this question. You know, he thought that it wasn't working at all, but it really is working. And you'll actually see it a lot on the legs here. You're not going to see it as I'm painting, really. You know, but that's because we're right up in front of the image and you're not going to notice it like this. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom out, and you can see on my mask that I actually did paint in on all of her skin areas. And what we're going to do is we're going to hide it, and you're going to see a big difference. So I'm just going to hide this layer. And now, especially in the legs, you could see when I start putting the skin airbrushing layer back on, that it really does smooth it out. It's subtle, but it's there, you know. And if you want to make it, you know, even more apparent, we're going to bring the opacity all the way up to 100%. By default, it's set to 80%, but you could fine-tune it to your liking. So off, on. You can see much smoother. There it is off, there it is on. And it just gives a great smoothing, you know, smooth effect to the skin. And once again, once you paint on it, it's not going to look like you're doing anything, but just do it, paint everywhere you need to, and then turn it off and on, and you'll see the effect, and you'll be like, wow, that really did smooth it out, and it looks like a completely different image now. So that's everything that you need to know for the full retouching action. And let's move on to our next action, which will be skin smooth, which you just saw how to do. So if you want, you could actually skip past skin smoothing and move on to frequency separation if you really want to. All right, so let's take a look at the skin smooth action. Now what we're going to do is we're going to open up our actions window, we're going to click on skin smooth, and then we're going to hit the play button at the bottom to run this action. So it's going to go through its progress, it's going to do a surface blur, and voila, we now have a skin airbrushing layer on top of our background image. Now it doesn't look like it did any skin, you know, airbrushing because it really hasn't. As you can see on this layer, we have a layer mask, and the layer mask is set to black. And now whenever you have a completely black layer mask, the entire effect is hidden. So what we want to do is we want to paint white onto this mask in order to show the skin airbrushing. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab my brush tool, make sure that my color is set to white, and I am just going to brush on her skin. Now, as I'm doing this, it really looks like nothing is happening at all. You know, it still looks like the same image to me. Nothing's really changing. I'm gonna yell at Jen and demand my money back because nothing's happening, so I'm upset. But trust me, after you paint everything in, I'm gonna show you that it actually is working and there's nothing to worry about. You know, someone actually contacted me before. They were just like, yo, it's not working. What's wrong with the action? But trust me, it's working. And I'm going to show you right now. So as you can see on my layer mask, I actually did paint into it. So it should be showing some skin airbrushing. And it really is. And I'm going to show you by turning off the skin airbrushing layer. So if I turn it off, you could see all the detail. And if I turn it on, you can see that it actually did smooth out her skin. Now, let me just zoom in a bit more because you really notice it in the legs over here. Let me actually zoom in on the legs a bit. Just ignore that horrible cut on the model. This is one of the main reasons why I ended up using this image, is because you could actually see all of Jen's actions on this image perfectly. And on a later one, I believe it's frequency separation, I show you how to actually remove this. But sticking to skin airbrushing, if we hide the layer, you could see so much more detail in her legs. You could see all these veins and all these marks and whatnot, but if we put that back on, it smooths it out a lot. And to really see the effect even more, let's just bring the opacity up to 100%. So now if I turn it off, you can see all the detail in the legs. If I turn it on, much more smoother, beautiful look. You even notice it in her face. Let me turn it off. Yeah, you can see all this detail in the face and everything, but if I turn it on, much more smoother, beautiful features, and much softer skin. So that's essentially it. That's how this action works. Just make sure that you're actually painting onto the layer mask, and that's how you'll see the effect. Also keep in mind that as you're painting, it's really not going to look like you're doing much of anything at all, but if you turn the layer on and off, you'll see the difference, and you'll see that the actual action is actually working. So let's move on to the next action, which is frequency separation. Now, frequency separation is an advanced retouching technique, but this action will actually help you out a lot and do all of the setup for you. And what you would use this action for is to actually fix skin while still maintaining texture. And we don't want to just have blurry looking skin, so we're not just going to blur everything out in our images. We really just want to clean up certain things and keep the texture. And frequency separation is great for achieving this. So once we run the action, I'm just going to click on frequency separation and then click the play icon at the bottom of our actions window. And once we run this action, you're going to get this pop-up for Gaussian blur. And what we want to do is we want to actually adjust the radius to blur out certain details in the image that we're looking to fix. And one of the main details that we want to fix are these tan lines over here. So I'm just going to adjust my radius until those tan lines are just blurred enough, like right here. So you see I'm not going lower than this where you could still see the tan line a bit, and I'm not going all the way out where you really don't see anything at all. So I'm just dialing this down, and I think it was around 20 something. Yeah, so let me go to like 23. You know, it's going to be different for your image, whatever you want to do. You want to get it blurred, you want to blur out most of the detail. And once again, for like skin, for tan lines, if you're trying to fix that, just blur out the tan line completely. And you don't want to go further than that. So I'm just going to hit OK, and it's going to run the rest of the action. Now, once again, this is another one of those great actions where it looks like it did nothing to your photo. And it really did do nothing to your photo, because all this action does is it sets up the steps for you to do the editing yourself. Now, let's take a look at what it's set up for us. So we have this layer group, which is frequency separation, and it's a group. So if I just drill down, we see that we have 3 layers in it. We have a high frequency layer, tone painting, and low frequency. Now, there's a lot of information behind frequency separation, and because it is an advanced technique, we'll probably even include a link inside of the description that gives you a full rundown of exactly what frequency separation does. You know, F-Stoppers has a really great article on this, so we're just going to send you over there so you could read up more on it. But for right now, I'm just going to show you how it works. So I'm going to show you how I'm going to get rid of this tan line over here. But before I even get into the tan line, let me show you how to get rid of this horrible scar on our model's knee. So what I'm going to do is on the high frequency channel layer, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to grab my patch tool. And you can find the patch tool in your spot healing brush in the same panel, kind of. It's weird. It's a nested tool, you know. So the main tool is the spot healing brush, but if like you click on that and you hold down, you'll see all these other tools next to it. So I'm just going to grab my patch tool, And the way that this works is you create a lasso around around an area. So I'm just going to drag and circle around here. And now that I have my circle closed, I'm just going to click in here and I'm going to drag around until I see a texture that I like. You want to do a cleaner texture, but the great thing about this is you could just move around and you're going to see exactly how it's going to look. So I want something like around here. And voila, it finished. So I'm just going to switch over to like my move tool, and let me actually just deselect this by holding down Command on Mac, Control on PC, and pressing the letter D. So that'll deselect it. So as you can see, we cleaned up the knee and it still has the texture in there and it looks pretty darn good if you ask me. Now let's move on to these tan lines. If you want to see what it looked before, I'll just turn off this entire layer. So there's the scar and bam, we removed it and it looks great. Now for these tan lines, depending on how dramatic the tan line is, you might be able to get away by using the tone painting layer. And the way that we use the tone painting layer is I'm just going to grab my eyedropper tool and I'm going to select a color that I want the tan line to be essentially. So I'm selecting a similar color in the same area and I'm just going to grab my brush tool and I'm just going to paint in there. Let me just change the size of my brush. Something like that will work. And if you paint in there, you see it's really not working well. The tone painting for this type of thing, it's just not giving us the effect and it's not doing it for us. So I'm just going to undo that by holding down Command on Mac, Control on Z, Control on PC, and the letter Z. So that'll undo it. I'm actually not going to use my tone painting layer to get rid of these tan lines. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go back to my high frequency layer and I'm going to fix it using the clone stamp tool. So I'm going to go over to my tools and I'm going to click clone stamp. And just like our brush tool, you could actually adjust its opacity. So I'm going to leave it at around like 40% opacity because we want to build on top of this. And the way the clone stamp works is it will clone a specific area and blend it in. So what I'm going to do, yeah, I know. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first select a sample and I'm going to sample it by holding down Alt on PC or Option on Mac. And I'm just going to click where I want it to kind of sample. And now if I paint in here, you could see that it's fixing the tan line. Now, once again, I have my, I'm just going to sample again a little bit lower. I have my opacity set low, so I have to go over it several times. The reason why I would do that is because I want to fine tune it. So I want to make sure that I'm going over it a couple of times. And you can see that the tan line is gone. And let me just sample over here, bring a little bit of that in, blur that out a bit. And you can see I fixed up that tan line. Now granted, we have like some weird coloring up here and whatnot, but there's the tan line and it's gone. And that weird little spot was there anyway, so I could leave that if I want to be lazy. But I don't want to be lazy, so let me go in and fix that. So I'm just zooming in, getting in close, and let me lower my brush size, something like that. And let me sample down here. And I'm just going to paint in there. And you can see that's making this spot darker. And a little bit more. There we go. And as you see, it keeps all of that skin detail still. Don't ask me how. You could go to that link in the description and figure out exactly how this works. But I'm just showing you what you need to do to make it work, you know. It's very technical. Frequency separation is a very technical thing. So once again, I'm just going to fix up this tan line in here. So I'm just going to hold down Option on Mac, Alt on PC, and I'm sampling an area. And now I'm just painting in here. And once again, I have the opacity set on this brush to about 40. So I have to just keep kind of painting in to get it looking right. And you can see it still has all this texture. And when I zoom out, those tan lines are gone. So we fixed up her knee and we fixed up these tan lines. It's It's a little bit apparent still over there, but you get the gist of it. If you keep playing around with it, you'll get it right. So let me just show you the before and after. So here's before, very harsh tan lines, especially on this side. Horrible scar, and we got rid of it in a couple of seconds. So that's how frequency separation works. And once again, for a full description of exactly what frequency separation is and the technical aspects of how it works, check out the link to that in the description. All right, so we just finished up frequency separation, and our next action on the list is stamp visible. This is a very easy and very simple, straightforward action. So once I run the action, you'll see what it does is it actually merges all of the layers in your image into one single layer on top of everything. And this is great kind of just to be used as like a backup button. So let's say you spent a lot of time on your frequency separation layers and you really just want to kind of like do some other effects to your image, but you don't want to mess up what you already did. Just do stamp visible. You'll get this new layer with everything that you've done, and you could just play around with this. So if you wanted to do something like liquefy, and you didn't want to mess up everything that you did on your frequency separation layers, you could just, or whatever effect you did, it doesn't have to be frequency separation, you know. This is just a backup, and this gives you an out to just copy everything that you did, put it on its own layer, and you could play around with that layer without affecting all the work that you've just done. So our next action that we're going to go over is dodge and burn. I'm just going to have it selected in our actions panel and then click the little play button at the bottom of the menu. Now what that's going to do is it's going to create two layers for us, a dodge and a burn layer. And if you watched our previous video on our previous segment on the full retouching, then you would have seen that that created a dodge and burn layer, and this is exactly the same thing. This just isn't creating all those other layers for you. So this is just for dodge and just for burn. Now on here you see that we have the layer masks, and the layer masks are set completely to black, so it's hiding everything. So in order to see a dodge or lighten in our image, what we want to do is paint white onto this layer mask. So I make sure that I have the layer mask selected. I just click in there, and I'm going to grab my brush tool, and I'm going to make sure that my current color is set to white. And now I'm just going to paint in to lighten up certain areas on her face and her hair. So I'm just going to lighten up some of these highlights. And yes, I know it's looking horrible already. Don't worry, that's fine. We're going to fix it. And the way that we're going to fix it is, as you can see, it looks horrible. It's very, very bright. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our dodge layer, and we're just going to lower its opacity. So that's going to blend it in, and I'm just going to bring it down until I get something that I like. And I like it over here. And let me just turn it off and on to see if I really do like it. So I'm going to turn it off. Okay, let me turn it back on. Okay, still a bit bright, so let me just lower the opacity even a bit more. That's looking great. So that's it with the dodge off, and that's it with the dodge on. So I brightened up these areas, I brightened up her hair, and I like it a lot. It adds more contrast to the image. Now, to really add more contrast, let's play around with our burn layer. And burn is just going to darken certain spots that we want. So, once again, on the layer mask, it's set all to black. We want to paint white in order to show. So I grab my brush is set to white. Let me paint in the areas that I want darkened. And once again, it's going to look hideous and horrible. I want to darken up her eyebrows, her eyelashes, bring those up. I want to darken that bit of hair. Let me get her chin, create some separation down here. And it looks disgusting right now, but that's fine. It's okay if it looks disgusting because we could fix it. So we're going to fix it by lowering the opacity. Blend it in. That's the solution to everything, okay? You're going to notice that as we go through all these actions, just blend it in. You don't like the way it looks, either lower the opacity or increase the opacity. So let's see how this looks with the effect off. So there you go, and let's turn the effect back on. Looks a lot better, adds a lot more contrast, and it's creating shape in her face, it's defining certain areas, and it's looking great. So let's see what it looks like with both the dodge and burn layers off. And all I'm doing to turn them off is clicking the little eye icon on the left side of the layers panel. So that's everything off. That's the original image. And that's our image after dodging and burning. Dramatic impact, looks great, looks so much better than the original image, which looks a bit flat. You know, the original image looks great, but dodging and burning helps bring out those areas that we want lighter and darker, and it creates that contrast, it creates mood, it creates depth. So it's a great tool to use, and it's a great action because it sets everything up for you in just one click. So the next action we're going to take a look at is clarity. So the way we're going to run it is we're just going to select it in our actions panel and then hit the play button. And the way that this works is it will actually merge all of your visible layers onto a brand new layer and then sharpen that layer. And it's really great that it does it that way because this type of sharpening is actually destructive. So if you did it on everything that you were working on and you wanted to go back and change it, it wouldn't really work that well. But the way that this action is set up, because it actually copies everything and puts it on its new layer, it's the best way to go about doing this type of clarity and this type of sharpening. So we have this new clarity layer, and another great thing, because it's on its own layer, if we think that it's a little bit too sharp, here's the before and here's the after. If it's a little bit too sharp, we don't like that it's so dark, we could just adjust its opacity. So let me bring it down a bit, and I like it around there. So I could just turn it off, and we could see the before image, turn it back on, and I like how the sharpening is working on here, just by dropping the opacity. If you like it at 100%, you could leave it at 100%. Me, I always like to dial things down a bit, make it look a little bit more natural and a little bit more believable. So that's all there really is to this clarity action. So let's move on to the next action, which is color layer. All right, so our next action is color layer. So I'm just going to select it, hit the play icon at the bottom of my actions panel, and what this does is it actually creates a brand new layer called color painting. And the way we want to work with this is actually by painting a color on the actual layer itself and not the layer mask like we're used to from the other actions. So I'm just going to click on the actual layer, which is on the left side, and we have her, you know, little red bustier. I don't think this is a corset. I know Jen is going to quiz me on this. I believe this is a bustier. So I'm going to paint a color. I'm just going to grab a color from my swatches. So it's red right now. Let's make it a blue. And I'm going to grab my brush from the toolbar. And I am just going to paint over this color. And look at that. Like magic, it is changing the color. And I'm going to be a little sloppy and paint outside of the lines, just so I could do this quick and I could show you how we could fix that. So here we go. I got her fingers blue, I got her skin blue. I really like the way this blue looks though. I kind of like that a little bit more than the red. But so now one option that we have is we could switch to our eraser tool and erase, and then switch back to our brush tool and try to paint back in, you know, certain areas. But because this already has a layer mask set up on it, why don't we just select that, and I'm going to paint black, and I could start hiding all these areas that I painted that I shouldn't have. And if I go over a little bit too much, if I skip, I don't have to like grab that color again. All I have to do is just switch to white and paint on there, and that'll paint it back in. So just as long as you always remember that when you're working on a layer mask, white shows, black hides. So let me switch back to black and fix up some of the skin areas here. You know, this is really just so that you get the idea of how this action actually works. You know, it just creates this layer where you could actually do some color painting too. And that's it. You know, it's really just that simple. So let's move on to our next action, which will be less red. All right, so let's take a look at what this less red action is all about. So I have it selected, and I'm going to hit the play icon so that we run the action. And what it does is it creates this whole new layer group called less red. And it does absolutely nothing to your image. And that's because it has this layer mask that's completely black. So when a layer mask is completely black, it's hiding this entire effect. And that's because we want to actually paint on to certain areas that we want to eliminate red from. Now, why do we have this action to just eliminate red? Why don't we have an action to eliminate blue and green? Well, the reason to have less red is to actually remove red from skin tone, because sometimes the skin is a little bit too red in an image. So that's why we just have this one action, less red. Now let me show you what it looks like applied to the entire image. So if I just had the entire thing set to less red, you could see that it made everything much less red, but it also made her skin tone a much more neutral color. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back, and this is how the layer normally is when you run the action. It's just completely black, the layer mask. So I'm going to grab my brush tool, I'm going to make sure that it's set to white, and I'm going to paint on her skin color. So let me just increase my brush size a bit. I want the hardness to be 0 because I want it to kind of blend in a bit. So I'm just going to paint, and you could kind of notice it as I'm painting that the skin's getting much more desaturated, a lot less red. You really see it in her face up here. I'm trying to avoid her lips as much as possible, and I'm trying to do this quickly also. So let me just paint in here, and I'll just do the legs really quick. Wow, you really notice it in the legs. The legs look almost greenish now, but it's fine because you see that I actually, like, she does look a bit green, you know. I actually do not like this effect. I don't like how it looks on her. It's getting rid of way too much red. So how do we fix that? We just lower the opacity. That's my answer for everything. Just lower the opacity. And, you know, it seems kind of silly, but that really is all there is to it. When working with any of these actions, whenever an effect is too much, just lower the opacity, blend it in more, and you'll get to something that you really like and really works. And you can see right now, I just dropped this down to around like 50% opacity, and it looks a lot better. You know, here's the before. You could see that, you know, she does have a lot of red tones in her face. And after, we just dumbed it down. But because we used the layer mask and just painted on her skin, we were able to keep, you know, the effect away from her red dress and her red lips. And that's how the less red action works. All right, so the light color action is actually really cool because it's one of the actions where once you run it, you'll see it affect your image immediately. So we just ran it, and you could see. Now let me do like a before and after. So this is after and this is before. It's a really powerful effect, and what it does is it lightens up your image, and it also adds some sharpening, some punch to your image. It's a cool look, it really is, but it's not necessarily for everyone. But one of the great things that you could do about this is you could actually drill down the layer group by clicking the little triangle, and you could start playing with these layers. You could just hide or show whatever ones that you want for this effect. And you could even go into the colors, and you could change the colors. So we have this color layer here. I'm just going to double click on the scales, and let's maybe cool it down a bit. Let's add some blues to it. So now we have a blue look to the image. And you saw how quick that was to change it from what it was originally. All you had to do was click the the color layer, and just double click on these little scales here, and that pulls up the little color properties. Now, let's say, for example, you like this look, you like the brightness of it, but it's a bit too sharp. Well, you could just turn off like your punch, your sharpen, your HDR. Let me actually turn that HDR layer back on. I kind of liked it with that on. But you can see this is a cool looking effect, and if it's a little bit too much, once again, just play around with the opacity, lower that down a bit, and you got a nice, cool looking punch effect to your image. So here's the before, and here's the after. And that's how light color works. All right, so next we're going to run film color action. And this is very similar to the light color, where once you run it, you'll see the action, you know, take effect to your image immediately. So you can see here we get this really cool look to our image. And if you really don't like this, one of the great things, just like the other action of light color, we could drill down into this folder and start playing around with things. We could start hiding exposure and hiding the sharpening and the HDR and the colors, and just start taking away. And if you miss some of those things, just bring them back in. I actually like the tan and the brown look in this image, and I think I like the HDR too. I actually like this entire effect. Maybe the exposure is a bit too much. Okay, so there's something I don't like that much. So on this image, I don't like the exposure. I think it's a little bit too much. But I also don't like it with the exposure completely turned off. So what do? Let me turn on the exposure. I'm going to click the exposure layer. It's set to 55%. I'm going to lower that a little bit more. Like there. Like, let's keep it around like 30. And that's something that I like. I like the way that looks. And, you know, I'm actually happy with this look for my image, but for your image, it might be different. Maybe you don't like the tan and the brown colors. You could actually just double click on that and select a different color that you want. So now, like, let's make it a pink. No, I like the blue. You know what? Because it's red, let's make it red. There we go. Why not? Change it to whatever color you want. And all I'm doing is I'm just double clicking on that color, you know, that little color swatch icon there, and it pulls up my color picker, and I can just change the color to whatever I want. And that's how you work with the film color action. So let's move on to our next action of sharp color. All right, so the next action we're going to take a look at is sharp color. I'm going to select it in my actions panel and hit the play button inside of my actions, and you're going to see this effect take over your image right away. And you can see that we now have this sharp color layer group, and what it does is it sharpens your image and it brings out the colors. But it does it a little bit too much, and I always think that this effect is a bit too dramatic. So what I want to do to actually dumb it down a bit is just drill down the layer group and play around with stuff, you know? You don't know unless you try, so maybe I don't like the exposure, or I don't like the sharpening. I actually don't like the sharpening, so I'm going to turn that layer off. HDR, I'm going to leave you on. Let's see what contrast looks like off. All right, I think that the contrast is way too much. But I do want some contrast, so I'm just gonna drop the opacity down. It was already at 35%. I want to bring that down to maybe like 10, 15, somewhere around there. 16%. I like the way that looks. That looks good to me. And all I'm doing, I'm just judging this based off of my eye, and I'm just moving stuff around. You don't need to worry about specific numbers to create some type of recipe. It really is just playing around and getting it to a way that you like. So I'm not at 15%, I'm at 16%. You might be at 35%. You might like the contrast on your image, you might not. But it's all, you know, a matter of your opinion and what you like. The saturation for me is a bit too much. Her skin's a bit yellow, so I'm going to bring that down. The warmth, I like it. Everything else at this point I kind of like. So that's it for sharp color. There really isn't that much more to it. You know, it's very similar to the other effects that we were looking at, you know, the light color and film color. So let's just move on from here and go straight into the retro effects. All right, so let's take a look at perhaps some of the most fun actions in this action set, and these are the retro effects. So I'm just going to start off with retro 1, and I'm going to hit the play icon at the bottom of the actions, and now you get this really cool, really nice retro effect. However, I'm not happy with the color. I want to change the color. I don't like that it's reddish. So what do? We could actually adjust that. All you have to do is just drill down in the layer group, and you have this one layer called colors. So let me just double click on the little scales here, and this pulls up a color balance. So it's a bit too warm. I want to cool it down. So let me just drag my cyan over, bring my blue up. And now we have a much more cooler image. And I like that. I think it looks cool. No pun intended. So you could just play around with all of the layers in here. You could turn the tone on or off. I actually like the tone a little bit more muted. So let me just adjust the opacity of the tone. I want to keep the tone, but I just want to lower it because I thought it was a bit too much for me. Let's see the fade. All right, so I don't like what the fade is doing with it turned on. I like it turned off, but I want to have some of that fade. So let me just select the fade layer, bring the opacity down. I like that. So I'm only at 8%. It's very subtle, but I like the look. I like the way it looks with it on as opposed to off. I could change these tan and cream colors if I wanted to. I could adjust the exposure. I like it. I like the way it's looking. This is a really great look. And you could do this with all of the other retro effects also. So let's take a look at what the other ones look like as well. So let me run Retro 2. So with Retro 2, you get a completely different retro look. This might work for your photo. It might not work for your photo. I don't like the teal. So let me just drill down into the layer menu, the layer group. You do that by clicking the little triangle next to the folder icon. I don't like the teal, so I'm just going to double click on the color. I'm going to use my color picker, and let's see, what color do I like? And it's great because I see it immediately, so I could just pick a color. Let's go with something yellow. Ooh, I like the way that looks. A little gold. So I'm liking the way this looks, but I don't like everything. Let's see, what do I want to change? Let's just play around. I'm just hiding and showing some of these layers. And the way you do that is by clicking the little eye icon. All right, I don't like the tone, so I'm going to leave the tone off. Colors are good. Saturation is fine. Fade. All right, let's lower the fade. So I have my fade layer selected. It's at 20% opacity. I'm going to lower that down to 8. And I like this retro look. I like the way this looks. This looks pretty cool. So I'm going to leave it at that. And let's just take one last look at Retro 3 and see what that action looks like. Another completely different looking retro look. So you really just take the one that you like and play around with it and really make it your own. So we have the cool looking hues in here, which I like. Ooh, I actually like it without this blue. So I'm going to leave the blue off. I like it that way. Fade, I could probably tell you right now, I want to bring that down to 8% like I did for the other actions. So you just play around with all of these layers until you get something that you really like. And I'm really liking the way that this Retro 3 look is looking right now on my image. This is pretty cool. So here's the before and here's the after. Now let's move on to the black and white film looks. All right, so let's take a look at the black and white film effects. So I'm just going to take BW Film 1, and I'm going to run that action, and you get this really cool black and white filmic look. And one thing that I actually hate about this look and this effect is the grain. The grain is just so much on the image, but that really isn't a problem, because if we drill down into the layer group, we see that we have a grain layer. So what I could do is I could just drop the opacity of this and minimize the effect of that grain. So I like it somewhere around like 50%. And to me, that looks a whole lot better. And I really like this look. I really like BW Film 1. I really like this action a lot because it's pretty much 100% perfect. I could use this on just about any photo and it will look great. It's just that grain is normally a little bit too much for me. But, great thing about all of these actions is you could drill into them and, adjust it, each and every little individual layer to your liking. So that's how BW Film 1 looks. Let's take a look at how BW Film 2 looks. All right, a little bit more washed out. This is a bit of more antique-y looking, but once again, that grain is killing me. So let me just drop it down a bit. Yeah, like in like the 50s, I like it. I like the grain in the 50s. I like the sepia tone on here. That's looking great. That's really cool. So that's another great action. Now, last but not least, let's take a look at BW Film 3. Let's see how that action looks. All right, this is very contrasty, very, very contrasty. But I don't have a problem with the grain in this action. Let's see why. That's because the grain is set to 50%. Look at that. Who knew? So I'm fine with the grain in this. The contrast I think is a bit too much for me. So I could dumb that down, just lower the opacity a bit. Let's see, the sharpening. Yeah, the sharpening's too much for me. But once again, this is all my taste. You know, you might like it this sharp, you might not. If you don't, just lower the opacity. Don't like the HDR? Lower the opacity. Increase the opacity. If you want more of that HDR look, you know, just play around with this. That's all that it is. That's all that separates essentially like pro photo editors from the people who are just starting off. And it's a bit of a shame. It seems a little backwards because it's like if you're just starting off, you should be playing. You should be messing around with all these things, you know, mess around with the opacity slider, turn things on, turn things off. But a lot of people starting off don't do that because they don't know to do that. So seriously, just have fun, play around, dial this, you know, effect into exactly what you want it to look like. And that's how you're going to set your photos apart from everyone else. So that'll do it for all of Jen's actions. Next, let's actually take a look at some pro tips that I use each and every time that I'm working with Photoshop. If you watch this entire video all the way through, you might have caught some of those things already. So let's just head on over to the next segment. Alright guys, so this is the last segment of this video, and this is where I'm going to give you guys some pro tips that I use all the time when working inside of Photoshop to really help speed up my workflow. Now, the one way that you could really speed up your workflow is by learning some shortcut keys. So by actually using your keyboard in certain areas, you could actually speed up your workflow as opposed to having to like go over to your tools to like resize your brush, to zoom in, to zoom out. So I'm going to show you how to do all that stuff on your keyboard. It's very quick, it's very fast, and once you learn it and you start practicing it, you're not going to go away from it, you know. I have like a Wacom tablet and you could like set the buttons to like zoom in, zoom out, and do all these things. I never use that because I'm just so used to using the keyboard and it's just so much faster that way. So let's say you want to jump straight to your brush tool. You could spend all the time taking your mouse, moving over to your tools bar, clicking the brush tool, and coming right back. You could do that if you want, but it's just so much faster to just hit the letter B on your keyboard. So no matter where you are, no matter what tool you have, if you hit the letter B, it will pull up your brush tool. Now, I want to actually show you something a little bit cool on this example. So I have my black and white film layer, you know, on top of my background layer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint black onto its layer mask. So I have black selected, and if I paint onto it, you see that I'm hiding the black and white film look and I'm painting through and I'm actually getting color. So if you ever wondered how to do like the black and white with a splash of color, this is how you do it. Just do an entire black and white effect and then paint a layer mask onto it. So I'm painting onto here and it kind of sucks because my brush is so small. Now I could right click, adjust the brush size, go back, not like it, but the faster way to do it is to use the bracket keys on your keyboard. So if I hit the right bracket key, that will increase my brush size. I can just keep tapping it until my brush gets bigger, bigger, bigger. I could hit the left bracket key and that brings my brush down smaller, smaller, smaller. So especially if you're working with like a pen, you just go back and forth between these two and you could easily go in and brush areas quickly and efficiently. So if I need to like bring it down, I'm just hitting the bracket key, the left bracket key to lower my brush size and the right bracket key to bring it back up. And that's just a much quicker way to work with your brush tool. Now, let's say I'm painting and whoops, I go into her hand. I really didn't want that. So I can either head all the way over to my toolbar and swap my, you know, foreground and background color, the black and white over here, or even faster than that is I could just hit the letter X and now swap the colors. So I'm gonna paint in white here because I want to show the black and white effect. And if I go too far over, I could just hit X again. Now I know I'm on my black and I'm just painting on. So it's really quick going in and out of those two to hide and show the effect. Now, let me just get rid of this completely because as you might have noticed, I've been painting with a very hard brush. So let me show you that using the mouse instead. So using the mouse, you could see I have the hard brush. So if I'm just clicking, very hard round edges. You could actually adjust your brush hardness by using those same bracket keys to increase your brush size or decrease your brush size, but to adjust the hardness, just hold down Shift as you hit those bracket keys. So if I hit the right bracket, it increases the hardness all the way to the top. And if I keep pressing the left bracket down, you see it looks like my brush is getting smaller. That's just showing you that the hardness of it is dropping. So now I have a nice soft brush to paint around with. So once again, to adjust the hardness of your brush, you hold down Shift and you use the right and left bracket key. So if I want a really hard, I'm going to keep pressing the right bracket key until I get a hard look. If I want it really soft, I'll press the left bracket key to get a soft painting of my brush. And that's really it for the brushes. That's all I wanted to show you. Once again, X to swap your color, which comes so much in handy when you're working on a layer mask, because you want to show and hide. So you just hit X to show it, X to hide it, and you're swapping those foreground and background colors. So that's a very useful, keyboard shortcut that I use all the time. Once again, B is for your brush tool. The bracket keys are to increase and decrease the size. So let's move on to another shortcut that I use all the time, and that's zooming in and zooming out. So how do you do this on the keyboard without having to grab your zoom tool, click in, click in, click in, click out? The way you do this on the keyboard is you hold down Command on Mac or Control on PC, and you use the plus and minus keys. So plus will have you zoom in, and minus will have you zoom out. So if I needed to get into her eyes, and let's say I didn't want the black and white look on her eyes, I could just, paint in on her eyes, and I have her eye color, and let me get her lips in. There we go. That looks great. So once again, to zoom in and out, Command on Mac, Control on PC, and the plus and minus buttons on your keyboard. Now, once you're zoomed in a lot, you could use your mouse to kind of move from side to side, but if you're not using your mouse, if you're using a tablet, it's very useful to just hold down the space bar. And when you hold down the space bar, no matter what tool you're using, it automatically turns into the hand tool. So you can just click, drag, and move around your image to wherever you need to go. So this is very helpful when you're zoomed in a lot, or just anytime you need to move your image around. Just hold down the space bar and move your image around. It's as easy as that. And as soon as you let go, it goes back to whatever tool you were using. So those are essentially the little shortcut keys that I wanted to show you guys, because once you learn these, it will really help speed up your workflow. It doesn't seem like it at first, but if you have to keep going back to the brush tool, go back to your colors, keep going back and back and back, it really leaves just enough time to mess up your creative flow. You want to be able to be working in the moment as fast as you can, and using these little shortcut keys, you'll definitely be able to. And the one that I really always use, no matter what I'm working on, is the zoom in and out. So once again, that's Command on Mac, Control on PC, plus and minus. I'm always using that. You always have to zoom into your image, and the space bar for the hand tool. All of these shortcuts come in very much handy. You don't have to learn every single shortcut that there is, but try to learn the shortcuts for the tools you use the most. If you're copying layers all the time, learn that shortcut key. If you're using your text tool all the time, learn that shortcut key. Just figure out how you work and learn these shortcuts to make your workflow faster. Well, I hope you all found this video and Jen's actions to be very useful. And if you haven't purchased the action set just yet, you could find a link to it in the description below. It really is a great set of actions, as you could see from this video, and for the price, you really can't beat them. Now, feel free to post your images that you use these actions on to Jen Rozenbaum's Boudoir group on Facebook. If you want to find out more information about Jen, you could find links to her website and her social media pages inside of the description. And just in case you guys wanted to see more videos made by me, make sure you subscribe to my 2 YouTube channels, Pimping Pixels and Photography by Greg. That's Photography by Greg. Me. Yeah. You could also find me on Facebook, and once again, all of these links are just inside of the description. And I really just want to say thank you all so much for watching this video, and I hope you all have a fun time editing your photos with Jen Rozenbaum's Photoshop Actions. Bye-bye now.